The abandoned Helix 9 detention station drifted aimlessly through the cold void at the outer edges of the Celestial Alliance. Mold crept across its surfaces. Lighting systems flickered erratically. Walls rusted, and pipes froze. In the distance, a dying red dwarf star cast an eerie crimson glow across the entire station, painting everything in shades of blood. Adrian Core moved carefully through the dimly lit corridor, his boots leaving imprints in the thin layer of frost that covered the floor. He was a salvage engineer, sent to inspect the malfunctioning station for recoverable parts. His coveralls were stained with oil and grease, and his hands bore numerous scars from years of dismantling rusty equipment. Strapped to his side was an ancient sword, a relic passed down through generations of humans, known simply as Conscience. The year was 32-25 kg. Era of Liberation. A time when humanity had expanded across the galaxy, but still preserved ancient weapons from bygone eras. Helix 9 was one of the deepest detention stations, cast adrift following the First Construction War. As Adrian examined a damaged auxiliary pipeline, his handheld scanner detected an anomaly behind one of the walls. Following the signal, he discovered a hidden chamber that had remained sealed for 3 centuries. A door of dense steel alloy, secured with ancient molecular bonding technology. The access codes and symbols had long faded, making it impossible to open with modern plasma cutters. His engineer's instinct prompted him to tap the rusted Conscience sword against the door. The first strike created a small crack. The second widened the fracture. By the third strike, the molecular bonds shattered completely, revealing the entrance. Behind the door, Adrian discovered a pale blue-skinned woman chained to the wall. The chamber walls were covered with thousands of names and stories etched deep into the metal, evidence of 300 years of confinement. Records of the dead, tactical diagrams, messages addressed to invisible recipients. The figure introduced herself as Saria, former Grand General Sarayer, branded a traitor to the Empire. "How did you break the seal?" she asked, her voice hoarse from centuries of disuse. "No one has been able to penetrate molecular bonding in... How long has it been?" 300 years, Adrian replied, stunned by her appearance. "And I didn't do anything special. Just hit it with this old sword." Saria's eyes fixed on the rusted blade. "An ancient weapon breaking advanced bonds. There's poetry in that." After breaking her chains with the sword, Adrian helped Saria through the chamber door. Suddenly, alarms that had been silent for centuries blared to life. Ventilation systems activated, forcing them into a chaotic maze of pipes, where they had to navigate damaged detention cells and glowing uranium veins. "I was the commanding officer of the Acer Empire's 3rd Brigade," Saria explained, as they rushed through the station. "I refused an order to massacre civilians on Bellari. This place, Helix 9, was built to bury alive those who would not bend." Her voice carried centuries of contained rage. "My own sister, Empress Sina Sarayer, signed the order for my eternal imprisonment." Adrian guided Saria to his small salvage ship, and they barely escaped as an Imperial pursuit squad materialized from a translocation gate, signaling that much greater danger lay ahead. In hyperspace, Saria recounted her life story, how she had risen through military ranks to become a respected general, her refusal to carry out the slaughter of Bellari civilians, the military tribunal that followed, and her sister's silent signature on the banishment order. "By releasing me, you've shaken the royal family to its core," she explained. "They've spent 3 centuries erasing me from existence. My return threatens everything they've built on lies." Adrian suggested they land in the outer territories, but Saria had other plans. She guided their ship along a secret route toward Acer Prime, the gleaming capital of the Empire, intending to publicly expose the lies of the regime. Near the outskirts of the capital, they made contact with Kira, a 19-year-old intellectual secretly working with the Broken Chains resistance movement. Kira had pieced together fragments of information about Saria from leaked data and was ready to spread the truth. She was responsible for printing pamphlets, creating graffiti, and distributing underground songs calling for the overthrow of the established order. "I've heard whispers of your name," Kira told Saria, her eyes shining with admiration. "In history classes, they tell us you betrayed the Empire. But there are inconsistencies in the official records, gaps where something should be." Through Kira, Saria released evidence of her tribunal, testimonies, and records that had been systematically destroyed. Slowly, civilians began to wake up to the truth, but Imperial forces intensified their hunt. Adrian employed clever engineering tactics to help the group infiltrate the capital city without being identified. "The day of ascendance is tomorrow," Kira explained. "Empress Sina will appear before tens of thousands at the Golden Divine Square. It's our only chance to confront her publicly." The following day, tens of thousands gathered at the Golden Divine Square, waiting for Empress Sina Sarayar to appear. Magnificent displays filled the air, and enormous screens projected images of Saria, labeled as historical criminal. Suddenly, from the sidelines, Saria emerged, walking proudly toward the honorary platform. The historic confrontation unfolded. Two Sarayar sisters, one holding a rusted sword, the other draped in royal robes. Saria challenged, "You erased me from history, sister. The people deserve to know why our kind once massacred the innocent." Sina trembled, surrounded by her nuclear guardsmen. The crowd murmured in confusion, passing along the shocking news that the traitor still lived. A former sergeant, moved by the revelation, fired a warning shot against the order to protect the Empress. The command chain faltered, and guardsmen began lowering their weapons, offering various justifications. Violence erupted as citizens surged forward, toppling symbols of authority. The demonstration transformed into a riot. Kira rushed forward to protect Saria, shielding her with her body, and took a fatal plasma burst to the chest. Her blood spilled across the brightly lit square, shocking the crowd into full-scale rebellion. Saria drew conscience and charged alone into the ranks of elite guards. Each swing cut through advanced armor, revealing frightened soldiers within. Waves of citizens joined the fight with improvised weapons, and the uprising spread throughout the square. Sina was forced to retreat, her forces still controlling the government district. But the news spread rapidly. Cities across the empire rose in rebellion, and military units defected. Imperial forces withdrew, leaving a capital in turmoil. Saria carried Kira's lifeless body to a secret location and immediately recorded her testimony and complete story on a portable core data device. For 3 days and nights, she documented everything, from the Bellari massacre, the military tribunal, 3 centuries in chains, to the revolution sweeping across the stars. She sent thousands of copies of this data via subatomic waves to resistance groups throughout the empire. The truth spread like wildfire, from the peaks of the Imperial Chamberlain's Tower to the depths of the mining pits. A year after the uprising, the empire still existed, but had amended its constitution. No order shall be recognized if it violates the dignity of rational life. The Imperial Education Bureau established classes on command ethics, including a section on refusing immoral orders. Half a century later, Saria had passed away. The conscience sword was displayed in an unnamed folk museum, beside a wall of broken chains. People came to pay silent respects, laying flowers without words. In the epilogue, an elderly engineer named Zara, who had heard Saria's story from a friend, worked at the minor planet construction yard. On her workbench lay a preserved fragment of rusted chain. She handed it to her young apprentice with these words, "Remember, the greatest chains exist in the mind. Justice must be chosen daily, even when it costs us what we hold most dear." The dim light of the workshop caught the metal fragment, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the stars, binding past to future in silent testimony. Helix 9 had been abandoned for decades, its corridors empty, save for the ghosts of those who had died within its walls. The station's exterior was scarred from micrometeorite impacts, its hull compromised in several sections. Inside, emergency lighting cast long shadows down frost-covered passageways, and the air tasted stale despite the failing life support systems still attempting to cycle it. Adrian Core had visited many derelict stations in his career as a salvage engineer, but something about Helix 9 made his skin crawl. The station hung in orbit around a dying red dwarf, the star's bloody light filtering through viewports and casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow. "Just find the core processor units and get out," he muttered to himself, adjusting the tool belt around his waist. His hand brushed against the sword strapped to his side, an ancient weapon called Conscience, passed down through his family for generations. Most engineers carried plasma cutters or multi-tools, but Adrian kept the sword as a reminder of humanity's roots among the stars. His scanner beeped softly as he moved through the station's maintenance level. The original mission parameters were clear: locate salvageable components, particularly the quantum processing cores that would fetch a premium on the frontier markets. Adrian had taken the job hoping to earn enough to repair his ship and find a quiet corner of the galaxy to call home. The scanner led him to a section of wall that didn't match the schematics. While the corridor should have continued straight ahead, it terminated in what appeared to be a solid wall of reinforced metal. Adrian ran his gloved hand over the surface, feeling the cold seep through his fingers. "This doesn't make any sense," he murmured, checking his scanner again. The device insisted there was an open space beyond the wall, along with unusual energy readings. After a thorough examination, Adrian discovered faint traces of molecular bonding, an ancient technology that fused materials at the atomic level, creating seals that were nearly impenetrable. He tried his plasma cutter first, but the beam scattered harmlessly across the surface. Frowning, he stepped back and considered his options. Without thinking, he unsheathed Conscience and tapped the flat of the blade against the wall, listening to the dull echo. The sound was different near the center, hollow, somehow, acting on instinct. Adrian struck the wall with the edge of the sword. To his astonishment, a hairline crack appeared in the seemingly impenetrable surface. He struck again, and the crack widened. On the third strike, the molecular bonds shattered completely, and a section of the wall crumbled away, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of metal and time. Adrian raised his light and stepped cautiously through the opening. The chamber was small but perfectly preserved. At its center, a blue-skinned woman stood with her arms extended, held in place by chains that connected to each wall. Her eyes were closed, but as the light touched her face, they snapped open, brilliant amber irises focusing immediately on Adrian. "Who are you?" Her voice was steady, despite the visible strain of her position. Adrian struggled to find words. "Adrian Core, salvage engineer. I didn't expect to find anyone alive here." "Alive is a relative term," the woman replied. Her gaze shifted to the sword in his hand. "Is that what broke the seal?" Adrian nodded, still trying to process what he was seeing. The walls around her were covered in intricate etchings, names, dates, diagrams, and what appeared to be strategic battle plans. Some sections contained detailed accounts of military campaigns, while others were filled with personal reflections. 300 years of thoughts carved into metal. "I am Seria Sarayer, former Grand General of the 3rd Brigade of the Acer Empire," she said. "And you, Adrian Core, have just committed high treason by finding me." The name sent a chill down Adrian's spine. Every schoolchild knew of the traitor general who had betrayed the Empire during the Bellari campaign. Her name was used to frighten children into obedience. But the history books claimed she had been executed for her crimes. "That's impossible," Adrian said. "General Sarayer died 3 centuries ago." A bitter smile crossed Saria's face. "History is written by those who chain their opponents, rather than face them. Her eyes flicked to the sword again. Your blade. What do you call it? Conscience, Adrian replied automatically. How appropriate. She tested the chains that held her. Would your conscience be willing to break these as well? Adrian hesitated only briefly before raising the sword. The chains looked impossibly strong, but when conscience struck them, they shattered like glass. Saria collapsed forward, her legs buckling after centuries of standing immobile. Adrian caught her before she hit the floor. How did you survive? He asked, helping her to steady herself. Imperial punishment cells are equipped with stasis fields, she explained, her voice growing stronger. I've been conscious the entire time, but my body hasn't aged. A mercy, they called it. She gestured to the etchings covering the walls. I kept my sanity by recording everything I could remember. Names of the dead, battle tactics, messages to those who would never read them. Before Adrian could respond, an alarm blared throughout the station. A system that had lain dormant for centuries, suddenly reactivating. Red emergency lights pulsed along the corridors. They're coming, Saria said, straightening herself. Breaking the molecular seal triggered an alert to the Imperial Guard. They've spent 300 years ensuring I remain forgotten. Who's coming? Adrian asked, already moving toward the exit. This station has been abandoned for decades. The Empire never truly abandons its secrets, Saria replied, following him with surprising steadiness. There will be contingency protocols, automated systems, perhaps even a dormant pursuit team waiting to be awakened. As if confirming her words, the ventilation systems suddenly roared to life, creating powerful air currents that threatened to pull them down the corridor. Adrian grabbed Saria's arm and guided her toward a maintenance shaft. My ship is docked on level 3, he shouted over the noise. If we can reach it before whatever's coming finds us, we might have a chance. They navigated through a maze of service tunnels and emergency passages, avoiding sections where the station's integrity had been compromised. Saria moved with the precision of someone who understood military installations, despite her centuries of confinement. Why did they imprison you instead of executing you? Adrian asked, as they paused at a junction to catch their breath. Saria's expression darkened. Because my sister couldn't bear to kill me, but couldn't allow me to speak the truth either. She met his gaze. I was ordered to oversee the cleansing of Bolari, a civilian settlement that had shown resistance to imperial taxation. I refused. In the Empire, disobedience is worse than death. Your sister? Empress Sina Sarayar. She signed the order for my eternal imprisonment personally. Saria's voice carried no emotion, but her eyes burned with 3 centuries of contained rage. The Bolari massacre proceeded without me. 12 million civilians died. The station trembled, and a distant sound like tearing metal echoed through the corridors. Adrian checked his scanner. Something's coming through a translocation gate in the main hangar, he said. We need to move, now. They reached Adrian's salvage vessel, just as the first Imperial pursuit craft emerged from the translocation gate. The small ship, little more than a cockpit with engines and a cargo hold, shuddered to life as Adrian initiated the launch sequence. They'll track us through hyperspace, Saria warned, strapping herself into the co-pilot seat. Let them try, Adrian replied, engaging the engines. The salvage ship shot away from Helix 9, narrowly avoiding a barrage of disruptor fire from the Imperial vessel. Moments later, they disappeared into the swirling blue corridor of hyperspace. As the immediate danger passed, Adrian set the autopilot and turned to his unexpected passenger. So, what now, General? The outer territories might be safe. The Empire's influence is weaker there. Saria shook her head. I've spent 300 years in chains while my sister's dynasty built an empire on lies. I won't hide in the shadows. Her amber eyes reflected the blue glow of hyperspace. Set course for Acer Prime. The Imperial capital. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. That's suicide. It's justice, Saria replied. And I know secret ways into the heart of the city, passages built for royal evacuation that can be used in reverse. She studied him carefully. You've freed me. Adrian Core, your debt is paid. Leave me at the next port, and I'll continue alone. Adrian considered his options. He could abandon this woman to her 3-century-old vendetta, return to his salvage operation, and pretend none of this had happened. But something about the determination in her eyes, the dignity with which she had endured her imprisonment, made that impossible. My father told me that conscience has been in our family for 1,000 years, he said, glancing at the sword. He said it was never meant to cut flesh, only to cut through lies. He set the navigation coordinates for Acer Prime. I'll help you reach the capital. Over the next 3 days in hyperspace, Saria revealed more of her story. She had been a decorated officer, loyal to the Empire until the Bellari campaign. When she refused the order to bombard civilian sectors, she was immediately arrested and brought before a military tribunal headed by her own sister. Sina was always the political one, Saria explained. Our parents groomed her for the throne while I was sent to the military academies. When I stood trial, she didn't speak a single word to me. She just signed the document with the imperial seal, and I was taken away. Why did she spare your life? Adrian asked. Blood ties, perhaps. Or maybe she thought eternal imprisonment was a worse punishment than death. Saria's expression hardened. But she didn't account for my patience. I've had 3 centuries to plan what I'll say when I face her again. As they approached the outskirts of the Acer system, Adrian disabled the ship's transponder to avoid detection. Following Saria's directions, he navigated through a complex series of asteroid fields and radiation belts that confused tracking systems. They landed in an abandoned industrial zone on the outer moon of Acer Prime. The capital planet loomed large in the sky above them, its surface a tapestry of lights from the sprawling metropolitan areas that covered most of the world. We need allies, Saria said as they disembarked. People who can help spread the truth. I'm not exactly well connected in revolutionary circles, Adrian admitted. But I know who might be, Saria replied. The Empire creates its own enemies with every act of oppression. We just need to find them. Their search led them to a technological slum built in the shadow of a decommissioned factory complex. Here, amid the discarded machinery and repurposed components, they found Kira, a young woman barely 19 years old who operated an underground information network known as Broken Chains. Kira's small workshop was filled with outdated transmission equipment and hand-printed pamphlets. When Saria introduced herself, the young woman's eyes widened in recognition. General Sarier, she whispered, but you're supposed to be dead. History has a way of correcting itself, Saria replied. What do you know of me? Only what the resistance has pieced together, Kira said, recovering from her shock. Your name appears in fragmented military records from 3 centuries ago. There are inconsistencies in the official account of the Bellari campaign, gaps where someone has clearly been erased. She gestured to a wall covered in diagrams and connected notes. We've been collecting these discrepancies for years, trying to reconstruct the truth. Saria examined the wall with interest. You've done remarkable work with limited information. Information is the one resource the Empire can't completely control, Kira said proudly. Every system has leaks, and I've made it my business to find them. She turned to a communication console. With your testimony, we could finally expose the lies they've built around Bellari. The people deserve to know. Over the next week, Saria worked with Kira to compile evidence of her tribunal, testimonies from the time, and military orders that had been systematically destroyed from official records. Adrian contributed his technical expertise, helping to bypass security protocols and access restricted archives. As fragments of the truth began to circulate through underground channels, the Imperial security forces intensified their presence in the outer districts, Patrols increased. Identity checks became more frequent, and surveillance drones monitored public spaces. "They know something's happening," Adrian observed after narrowly avoiding a patrol. "We need to accelerate our timeline." Kira agreed. "The Day of Ascendance is 3 days from now," she said. "It's the annual celebration of the Sarier dynasty's rise to power. Empress Sina will make a public appearance at the Golden Divine Square, addressing tens of thousands of citizens directly." "It's our best opportunity," Saria decided. "A public confrontation that can't be hidden or erased." The plan was dangerous, but simple. Kira would use her network to distribute Saria's story throughout the capital just before the ceremony. Meanwhile, Adrian would create a diversion to help Saria reach the platform where Sina would speak. On the morning of the Day of Ascendance, the capital city of Acer Prime was transformed into a spectacle of light and sound. Imperial banners hung from every building, and parade floats moved through the main avenues, depicting scenes from the Empire's glorious history, carefully edited to remove any trace of dissent or failure. Adrian, Saria, and Kira moved separately through the crowds, converging on the Golden Divine Square. Adrian had engineered false identities that allowed them to pass through security checkpoints undetected. Still, the risk of recognition increased with every step toward the central plaza. The square itself was a marvel of imperial architecture, a vast open space surrounded by towering structures of white marble and gold. At its center stood a massive platform where the Empress would address her subjects. Enormous screens positioned around the square showed historical footage and patriotic imagery, including occasional glimpses of historical criminals who had betrayed the Empire, Saria's image among them, labeled as a traitor executed for sedition. As the ceremony began, imperial officials took turns praising the wisdom and benevolence of the Sarier dynasty. The crowd responded with rehearsed enthusiasm, though Adrian noticed pockets of citizens who remained silent, watching with wary eyes. Kira's messages had reached some, at least. Finally, Empress Sina Sarier emerged onto the platform. Despite the 3 centuries that had passed, Saria immediately recognized her sister. The imperial longevity treatments had preserved Sina's youthful appearance, though her eyes carried the weight of centuries of rule. Sina began her address with practiced elegance, speaking of unity and prosperity under imperial guidance. As she reached the portion of her speech that mentioned historical challenges overcome by the dynasty, Saria made her move. She stepped out from the crowd and walked steadily toward the platform. Imperial guards moved to intercept her, but something in her bearing, the unmistakable authority of a military commander, made them hesitate just long enough for her to reach the steps. The crowd fell silent as Saria ascended to stand beside her sister. Sina's speech faltered mid-sentence, her composure cracking as she faced the sister she had condemned to eternal imprisonment. "People of the Acer Empire," Saria's voice carried across the hushed square without need of amplification. "I am General Saria Sarier, erased from your history by the woman who stands before you." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Security forces began to close in, but Sina raised a hand to stop them, her eyes never leaving Saria's face. "You've been told that the Bellari campaign was a necessary pacification," Saria continued. "You were never told that 12 million civilians died because they resisted excessive taxation. You were never told that I refused to carry out the order to bombard residential sectors. You were never told that your empress sentenced her own sister to eternal imprisonment, rather than allow the truth to be known." Sina found her voice at last. "Guards," she commanded, though her voice trembled. "Remove this impostor." A contingent of elite guards moved forward, energy weapons raised. But before they could reach Saria, an unexpected voice rang out from the ranks of the ceremonial guard. "Stand down!" An older sergeant stepped forward, his weathered face contorted with emotion. "I was there, at Bellari. I saw what we did." He turned to the crowd. "The general speaks the truth." The command chain faltered. Other guards lowered their weapons, offering various justifications. Some claimed confusion. Others openly declared support for Seria. The crowd, initially stunned, began to stir with unrest. "You erased me from history, sister," Seria challenged, drawing conscience from its sheath. "The people deserve to know why our kind once massacred the innocent." Sina trembled visibly now, surrounded by her nuclear guardsmen, elite soldiers sworn to protect the royal family at any cost. "What I did for the stability of the empire," she said, her voice barely audible over the growing tumult. The crowd surged forward, toppling barriers and overwhelming the security forces. What had begun as a controlled ceremony descended into chaos as citizens, emboldened by Seria's revelation, gave voice to centuries of suppressed grievances. Adrian fought his way through the crowd, trying to reach Seria as violence erupted across the square. Imperial forces fired warning shots into the air, but this only intensified the panic and rage. From the corner of his eye, Adrian saw Kira rushing toward the platform, her face set with determination. He called out a warning as he spotted an Imperial sniper taking aim at Seria, but his voice was lost in the cacophony. Kira reached Seria just as the sniper fired. Without hesitation, she threw herself forward, taking the plasma burst meant for the general. The young woman collapsed, blood spreading across her chest. A horrified silence fell over those nearest to the platform as Kira's sacrifice registered. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd's restraint vanished. Citizens armed with whatever they could find surged toward the Imperial forces. Seria knelt briefly beside Kira's body, closing the young woman's eyes with gentle fingers. Then, with conscience raised high, she charged alone into the ranks of elite guards surrounding her sister. The ancient sword moved with impossible precision, cutting through advanced armor and deflecting energy weapons. Each swing revealed the frightened soldiers within the imposing exoskeletons, stripping away the facade of imperial invincibility. Adrian joined the fight, using his technical knowledge to disable security systems and communication networks. All across the square, citizens who had moments before been passive observers became active participants in what was rapidly becoming a revolution. Sina, protected by her most loyal guards, retreated from the square as the fighting intensified. Imperial forces still controlled the government district, but the news of Seria's return and revelation spread rapidly through the city's communication networks. By nightfall, reports came in of uprisings in outlying cities and military units declaring neutrality or openly defecting. The Imperial forces withdrew to defensible positions, leaving much of the capital in the hands of the newly formed resistance. In the aftermath, Seria carried Kira's lifeless body to a secure location established by resistance members. Without pausing to rest, she began recording her testimony on a portable core data device, determined that the truth would never again be erased. For 3 days and nights, she documented everything: the details of the Bellari massacre, the military tribunal that had condemned her, the 3 centuries in chains, and the revolution now sweeping across the stars. She sent thousands of copies of this data via subatomic waves to resistance cells throughout the Empire, ensuring that no single point of failure could silence her again. "Truth is like a flame," she recorded in her final entry. "Once ignited, it cannot easily be extinguished. It may be contained for a time, but it will always find paths to spread." The revolution was neither quick nor clean. Imperial forces regrouped and fought to maintain control of key worlds. Civil war erupted in some sectors as loyalist and revolutionary factions clashed. But the foundation of the Empire had been irreparably cracked by Seria's return and the truth she carried. A year after the Day of Ascendance, a tenuous peace was established. The Empire still existed, but with significant reforms. The Constitution was amended to include the fundamental principle: No order shall be recognized if it violates the dignity of rational life. The Imperial Education Bureau established mandatory classes on command ethics, with a particular focus on the duty to refuse immoral orders. Sina remained on the throne, though with greatly reduced powers and under the watchful eye of a newly formed Senate. She never spoke publicly of her sister again, but those close to the Empress reported that she kept a small memorial to Kira in her private chambers, a reminder of the cost of silence. Saria declined all offers of political position or military command. She spent her remaining years traveling throughout the empire, speaking to gatherings both large and small about the importance of conscience and the courage to stand against injustice. "Chains are not always made of metal," she would tell her audiences. "The most effective bonds are those we place upon ourselves: fear, comfort, the desire to belong. Breaking those requires a different kind of strength." When she died, 52 years after her liberation from Helix 9, her body was cremated according to her wishes, and the ashes scattered across the memorial garden built on the former site of the Golden Divine Square. The Conscience Sword was displayed in an unnamed folk museum, beside a wall where citizens had attached thousands of small chains, each broken in the middle, symbols of personal commitments to speak truth against power. People came from across the galaxy to view the sword and the broken chains, leaving flowers in silent tribute to a woman who had endured 3 centuries of imprisonment without surrendering her principles. Decades later, an elderly engineer named Zara worked at the Minor Planet construction yard, overseeing the terraforming of small worlds for habitation. She had heard Saria's story from her father, Adrian Kor, who had passed away years earlier. On her workbench lay a preserved fragment of the chains that had once held Saria captive, a reminder of both imprisonment and liberation. When a young apprentice asked about the rusted metal, Zara placed it in the youth's hand. "Remember," she said, "the greatest chains exist in the mind. Justice must be chosen daily, even when it costs us what we hold most dear." The apprentice nodded solemnly, feeling the weight of the metal fragment, heavier somehow than its size would suggest, as if it carried not just its own mass, but the gravity of its history. "Is that why we do this?" the apprentice asked, gesturing to the viewport where a barren planetoid was slowly being transformed into a habitable world. "Creating new places where people can live freely?" Zara smiled. "We build worlds, yes, but it's up to those who inhabit them to build justice." She looked out at the stars scattered across the viewport. "Freedom isn't granted by governments or guaranteed by constitutions. It must be chosen anew by each generation, sometimes at terrible cost." The dim light of the workshop caught the metal fragment in the apprentice's hand, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the stars, a tenuous thread binding past to future in silent testimony. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the abandoned hulk of Helix 9 continued its lonely orbit around a dying star. Its corridors remained empty, but the echoes of what had transpired there reverberated still across a galaxy forever changed by a rusted sword named Conscience and the woman it had freed. The story of Saria Sarayar was eventually included in the imperial curriculum, taught to children alongside lessons about responsibility and moral courage. But in quiet corners of the empire, people still whispered the older, simpler version. For 300 years, no blade could break her chains, until a human's rusted sword did it with one swing. And in those words lived the enduring truth that no power, however vast, could forever contain the human spirit's yearning for justice.